Brace yourself. Get it passed up anytime now. Collect yourself. Things will never be the same in this sad world. Around a lot a bit, trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million missing pieces. When I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So sit back in your hole.
My eyebrows look okay? All right, good morning everybody. Good to be with you today. Welcome to our impromptu Arthurian Literature Roundtable. So let me have up here join me Angelica, Valeria, Rhea, Caden. How many is that? Who wants to join? Miguel, you want to come up?
Come on.
Yeah.
You take the turn.
Oh wait, is that, yeah, bring a chair. Or I can make Rhea sit on the floor. All right, so, and of course, just like yesterday, this conversation's for everybody. Before the start of the course, how many of you were familiar with the King Arthur story?
A little bit.
I mean, not necessarily experts, but I'm getting about half.
I watched the 7 Deadly Sins show.
You watch what?
7 Deadly Sins show.
Is there Arthur stuff in that?
It's an anime, sorry. It's Japanese cartoons. They're loosely based on Arthurian legend.
Did you just explain to me the anime is Japanese cartoon? Thank you.
Just in case, I don't know how old you are.
Yeah, I'm not older than cartoons.
Are you sure?
You sure about
You
that?
saw the first instrument being built.
I'm pretty sure he saw when the wheel was invented.
Yeah, probably.
How would you like a mouthful of teeth?
I'd love
Every
to
one
see
of
you
them.
try.
Was it even like the first cartoon ever?
Who's seen the Disney King Arthur, the Sword in the Stone?
I might have, but only when I was like very young.
I'm the same way. I almost certainly did, but probably only once, and probably only when I was very young.
I do know I watched The Kid Who Would Be King, which is like basically if Arthur was like after like the events of Arthur, but like the Sword of the Stone still exists and Merlin's still alive, like all in like modern ages.
Okay.
With a new champion who inherits the sword.
Okay. What was it called?
The Kid Who Would Be King.
Kid Who Would Be King. Okay. Anybody watch the? I think it's been off the air for a while, but anybody watch the Merlin series? Yeah, I used.
I know it's.
Who did in my PowerPoints? I used Uther from the Merlin series. I only watched a couple. It's pretty good, but it's so far off the storyline that I was trying to keep straight because I was about to teach the course. I'm like, I'll go back and rewatch that later. What did you find surprising about the Arthur story? What did you say? I did not see that coming. They didn't show that in Sword in the Stone.
Really see anything?
Nothing? You saw it all coming? Caden's like, yeah.
I would
Yeah,
say.
of course he killed the babies.
I would say probably like how many like morally evil choices Merlin had made. Like usually Merlin is depicted like making more like wise choices, and they're usually like morally good in most adaptions. You don't really see any like less.
Yeah, that surprised me too in preparing for the course, because I came into the course with just the average guy on the street who's halfway well-read's acquaintance with the Arthurian story, and yeah, the dual nature of Merlin. Like I had no idea that he was going to turn out to be half demon. Like that was, even though that story was written 800 years ago, so it shouldn't have been a spoiler. But yeah, like whoa, what? And some of the pranks he got up to in the stories about when he was little. Did we talk about some of that stuff?
We talked about like how he got his mother out of her execution.
Yeah. like there's one where he's walking down the street. Kid Merlin is walking down the street, maybe with. Remember, he had the two mentors. So there's Taliesin, who was the Druidic bard mentor, and then there was Saint Blaise, who was the Christian mentor. And I think he's walking with Saint Blaise, and he sees this guy, and the guy is like. He's coming back from a cobbler. A cobbler makes shoes. He's coming back from the cobbler shop, and he's holding some leather. He bought some leather to fix his shoes. And Merlin starts cracking up. He's laughing. And Blaise, or it might not be Blaise, whoever he's walking with, Blaise will say. Blaise like, dude, Merlin, what's so funny? And Merlin's like, this guy just bought leather to fix his shoes, but he doesn't know he's gonna die today.
Oh.
Like, that's.
Oh wait, you did mention that one.
Yeah.
I don't remember that one. So.
It was early in the year. I think it was first quarter.
Oh, gotcha.
So, the next question, understand that the assumption is it's school and you got to do something. So, when I ask you just, did you like spending a year with King Arthur? I'm not asking if that's what you want to do in your free time, right? If some of you will, I do, I'm a nerd. But you know, so I'm not saying you like it the same way you like hanging out with your friends and whatever you punk kids these days do with your friends, like what, roller derby and bungee jumping or
Bungee jumping.
That
Anyway.
actually sounds fun.
so did we please
No.
you might very few times you're gonna get to hear me say this. Could we please take this seriously? Did you like spending a year with King Arthur in English class?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, most definitely.
Better than IXL?
Better than I excel.
It was a lot better, especially with the less amount of assignments. There was a lot of fun readings.
I also think that at the time, the way that we started and also the way that we ended, like I don't know about the rest of the class, but me personally, I mean I grieved Arthur, you know, when he died, you know, reading when he battled Mordred and died. Like I actually got into the story, even though, you know, I wasn't here for a lot of it.
Yeah.
For some reason, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, me neither.
Even though the title was literally called
Yeah,
The Death
it
of
was-
Arthur.
They literally said it in a helicopter.
Yeah, even though it said it still came out as a surprise.
Yeah.
The one who's always asking who dies at the end on the death of Arthur.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, she did that with the Poetic Edda too.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we get so into the book, we sometimes forget what the title of what we're reading is about.
Damn, I wonder what happens to the death of Arthur in the end. Holy shit.
But still, though, sometimes we get so into what we're reading, we sometimes forget what we are actually reading about. So it means that sometimes some of the stuff comes out of nowhere, and we forget what we're reading.
But of course, going into the story, even knowing the title, even knowing, or even just doing the math, okay, this is taking place in the 400s, so he's probably not still alive. Nothing about the title Death of Arthur, if you don't already know the story, prepares you for the fact that he and his son are going to kill each other. That's the way it's going to end. Right, Megan?
I feel like most books that have death in the name, though, and like kind of tell you the outcome, are always the ones that are the most shocking when they do die.
Yeah.
Because like, I read another book, and the title was literally "They Both Die at the End," and when they both died at the end, it was still like a full shock because one, while you're reading, you kind of forget the title, but also I feel like books that tell you that they die, they literally make you feel like throughout the whole book that they're not gonna die.
Yeah.
I feel like the way they set up the story and everything kind of makes you forget, like, that this character is literally, you love this character, or you even don't, but you, like, bonded with this character throughout the book. So then by the end, you're just like, oh, but I like them. Like, they're not gonna actually die. Maybe the title is just, like an idea that they're dying,
Yeah,
of their character. But then they die, and you're like, what the freak?
Yeah, that was the way with one of my books that I read. It was really so sad that when one of my favorite characters passed away, I was like, why all of a sudden now? And then the second book, it was like the whole thing was like a dream. Like it came out of nowhere. Somehow they came back to each other. Some of the stuff doesn't make sense at all.
So in prepping over the summer, so I knew I knew that Arthur and Mort would kill each other at the end. I knew that going into it. What hit me the hardest emotionally, I think, was, well, by far what hit me the hardest emotionally, because I still can't get through it without at least tearing up, is from Alfred Lord Tennyson, when Arthur confronts Guinevere for the last time, and after laying into her, rightly so, he forgives her and says, we can't be together anymore. It'd be too much of a shame and too much of a disgrace, but God help me, I love you still. Let no man think other than that I love you still, and perhaps someday when we're both gone and we meet again in heaven, you can once again be with me, not with Lancelot, not with a lesser man, but with me. Don't answer, don't say anything, let me have that hope at least, and walks away. Like I'm almost tearing up, badly half-ass quoting it now. And then the other part that got me, I didn't get emotional in class, because now I knew it was coming, but this was something I was encountering for the first time over the summer, was also at toward the very end, when the dying Sir Gawain sends the letter to Lancelot reconciling with Lancelot. That one also got me. Yeah.
What I was gonna say is that I think that adding on to what you said with when you read, like what you said with the book, they both die at the end. You forget that they both die at the end, and you like them, so you're like, they're not actually gonna die. I think that more than that, it's more of we get you guys remember the movie, the round table for the Ring, for the book The Ring?
Yes.
We talked about.
Not at all.
So,
I do.
So I remember in that round table we talked about how they don't know, they just know they're dying in 7 days, right? And they just don't know how. But even though they know they're dying in 7 days, they're scared and terrified, and the more stuff they learn, the more scared they are. I feel like it's the same thing when it comes to the Book of Arthur, because since you already know what's gonna happen, you're only learning about circumstances. So it catches you even more off guard. Because we're talking about Percival and the Green Knight. Like I remember that's my favorite story, Percival and the Green Knight. And then all of a sudden we get back.
Don't let me get away with that.
Percival.
Not Gawain. But anyway, so Gawain and the Green Knight, that was my favorite story.
Gawain fought the Green Knight. Percival castrated himself. That's how you keep it straight.
Well, he didn't fight him. They just kind of had a punchy competition. But anyways. Yeah, he didn't fight him. He actually just impaled his eye through his freaking skull. But anyways, what I'm saying is that I believe that's what we look for. Like we're always looking for an answer, right? Like we're always looking for what's gonna happen next. Since we already know what's gonna happen next, right now we're just learning about what's going on, so we just forget. Because the story itself is also very immersive.
No, she's got history.
Well, also, another thing about that, I think that's also like kind of parallel to like our lives, like in real life. We all know that we're going to die eventually. We all know that everyone that we love is eventually.
I was just thinking that. You're stealing my thoughts.
is eventually going to die, but A, we don't know how, but B, we get attached to people, and
Yeah,
then
it's hard not to, isn't it? Yeah.
and then we forget that eventually there is going to become a point where that meeting is going to be the last time that we ever meet them, and then something happens, and then we end up mourning, completely forgetting that we already knew they were going to die, that everyone was going to die.
Yeah, that's why stories like this capture us, I think, at least that element of it, because it's sort of hard. Now we're getting philosophical here, and the highest compliment I can pay somebody is that they remind me of me, and what you said was something I would say. But I lost what I was going to say.
Philosophy.
Yeah. That. When you think about what does it mean to be insane, you would think, well, that being delusional, having your perceptions disconnected with reality, just disconnected from reality. At the same time, a big part of what it takes to stay sane is to operate under a soft delusion of our own immortality, or to at least ignore, to distract ourselves from the inevitability of our end. Because otherwise we follow the train of cause and effect, and whatever I'm doing right now, I'm doing it to accomplish something else, which I will do to accomplish something else, which I will do to accomplish something else. And at the end of that chain of instrumental goods, old humanities people, there's one last time you'll hear me talk about that, at the end of that chain of instrumental goods is nothing but death, right? And so, to stay sane, we distract ourselves from that, but to stay super sane, we don't distract ourselves from the reality, we integrate the reality, all right? So instead of living a life of distraction where I pretend not to know that I'm going to die, not kill ourselves, we embrace, not celebrate, but embrace the reality, the Latin phrase, memento mori. They used to, scholars used to keep skulls on their desks, or remember, O man, that you were dust, and to dust you shall return. If we keep death daily before our eyes, then we can prevent ourselves from getting too caught up in these needless, distracting chains of events that lead only to death, and focus instead on the true intrinsic goods that can never be taken for us. When we pursue things, when we love things because they are good in themselves, that's the kind of use of our selfhood that echoes through eternity, and that gives us, whether we believe or not in any other sort of more literal mortality, that gives us a certain immortality. Which brings us specifically to, I want us to say a few things about the Holy Grail quest aspect of the story. And to set this up, there's a new connection I made just last night. A new connection, what I think is a possible source of the story. We explored a number of sources of the story when we were talking about it. But there was this document that was written in the 700s. 700s was a low point in European civilization, really in the Dark Ages. And this was written in the Eastern Roman Empire, which still stood at that time. And it was an apocalypse. It was a supposed vision of the end of time. And it was allegedly written by a martyred saint named Methodius, who lived 400 years earlier, but that's just pretend. That's just the pretense of the text. And so this figure in the apocalypse is describing his vision of the last days and the rise of Antichrist and the final battle between good and evil. And he says there'll be a final Roman emperor, and the final Roman emperor will go to Jerusalem, and there in Jerusalem he will discover they already believed they had found the true cross that Christ was crucified on, but the emperor would go to Jerusalem, and he would find that the cross had been re-erected right on the site of the crucifixion, and the emperor would take off his crown and put it on top of the cross, thus renouncing all kingship and handing kingship back over to Christ. And then the cross with the crown would ascend into heaven, and after that, divine protection would be removed from the earth for a period, and that's when the Antichrist would emerge and ultimately lead to the final battle of good versus evil. How does the Holy Grail legend end? Right, the Holy Grail legend ends. Galahad finally finds it, and what happens? Peace and paradise and everything? No, because they blew that. Galahad dies. The emperor dies in the story, by the way. Galahad dies, and the Holy Grail ascends back into heaven. And there's sort of there's an element of almost a curse when the Holy Grail leaves. Like Britain, you could have had so much, but now you're going to have to deal with all sorts of darkness. But I'm not asking you to comment on that connection, because I just made it yesterday. The story itself, the quest for the Grail itself, why do you think that has captured people's imaginations for centuries? Why do we still tell that story? What do you think?
Getting to
I mean, it was like in the book it's a major event, right? Like it's not just Like it doesn't just happen. Like the entire round table leaves. And doesn't that also branch off into different stories of?
Oh yeah, we only sampled a few of the stories.
Yeah, so I think that's probably why, because you know from this one event you get so many perspectives, and I think that's what we were talking about yesterday. That when you find different perspectives in the same story, it makes you think deeper about the story. I think that's what. I think that's kind of like why it captures so many people's minds because the story is very well developed. You know, even though it's just he fell to the earth and he was almost struck down to earth, and you know it repeats the same stuff like all the time. But you can understand everything that's going on, and you can also understand what was going on the other side of what was going on with say Gawain at this time, or Galahad at this time, or Percival at this time.
I think also the fact that all the stories and everybody obviously heard about it is something that nobody could achieve on the quest to get the Holy Grail. So everybody that wanted to obviously went and again failed until the last attempt, which ultimately killed the people who finally found it. But the fact that it's such a wanted thing that cannot be found, like cannot be grabbed for one's own personal gain, really just made other people want to climb higher and just try to grab it for themselves first.
Yeah, I think the story really showed that like everybody had like faults. Like you couldn't just take it because you said you wanted it. I think like it like literally what she said, like it forced not only them but also like the people reading it to like realize that like not everybody is perfect and everybody has their faults, but also the story just made you love all these characters, and now they're forcing you to look at like they're not the greatest people in the world, not everybody's the greatest person in the world. And then it cuts to Galahad, who's the most boring and like like fleshed out character, because he's like he kind of pops up and then the only thing we truly learn about him is that he is perfect, and then he dies. So like I think that's kind of why it's so boring, because it literally forces you to look at the people you like, and it's like they're not always perfect, like in real life.
So I want to ask you,
Amanda, have you been here the whole time? Oh, okay.
Weren't there actual historical quests for the Holy Grail, or is that?
So,
It's a complicated question.
So there were actual historical quests for every conceivable relic that having to do with the life of Christ and the apostles. The Grail itself becomes part of the imagination. That's not. It's very unlikely that that's at all connected to the historical Arthur from the 5th century. The Grail stories really start being told later on, once the Crusades begin, and once you have people from Europe in the Dark Ages for generations would not have traveled more than 10 miles away from their village. Now they're crossing the world, and now they're actually going to the place where these sacred stories that they grew up with actually occurred, and they're seeing these things with their own eyes, and they're seeing relics. And the market in relics in the Middle Ages, you're going to have a lot. There's big money in it, so you're going to have a lot of fraudulent relics, but you're always also going to have a lot of legitimate, places that have strong claim to be where these things actually took place. Like the holiest site in Christianity in Jerusalem is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it's this massive complex that was built by the Emperor Constantine in the 300s. But it's built on what was believed to be the site of Christ's tomb, but it's big enough that it also includes Calvary, the hill on which he was crucified. And is it the actual site? I mean, how would you determine that? But it's got a really strong case, because there was a continuous Christian presence for the 300 years before the church was built, and that ain't the kind of thing people forget. So you've got these folks who have believed these things their whole lives, and medieval faith, even if whether we're people of faith or not, we know people of faith, but we don't know people of medieval faith. I mean, faith, the truths of the Christian faith were more real to a medieval peasant than anything in the physical world, right? And so to actually experience these things firsthand, that really inspires the Grail stories, which are then retrojected into the mythologized past of Arthur. But stories of heroes going on quests, that's something much more ancient than even the Arthurian literature. That's something that goes back to the oldest stories we have. Remember Gilgamesh under the water for the flower to give immortality?
Yeah.
In Greek myth, there was the quest for the golden fleece. You could think of the entire Odyssey in his quest just to get home back to his family as one massive quest narrative. Human literature and almost certainly human literature all the way back as long as we've been people. If I don't know what the cavemen were talking about around the fire 200,000 years ago, but if I had to guess, quest stories. Why do these quest stories capture our hearts? I think in large part it's because they remind us that no matter what we get mixed up with in our everyday lives, no matter how we get caught up in minutia and interpersonal conflicts and things that seem so important to me right now that just simply won't matter in 6 weeks, but I'm not in a frame of mind to recognize that, so it feels like the end of the world. That to really live a life that's meaningful, what I need to do is to determine not just what's good, but what is the greatest good. And it is the greatest good that more than anything else is worthy of my time and attention. What makes somebody a hero, a person of virtue and strength? It's because he or she is willing to sacrifice in pursuit of the greatest good. And in the Arthurian story, the Holy Grail is, if we literalize it, we'd try to enter the book and just say everything in it just is what it is. Well, from their faith perspective, it really is the greatest good, or is standing for the greatest good, which is God from their perspective. But it's not just the path to, or the best path to a meaningful life is to pursue the greatest good that I can. It really is the only path to a meaningful life. To the extent that I've let anything distract me from pursuing, it's in Latin is the summum bonum, the greatest good, goodness itself, goodness, truth, beauty. Anything I let get in the way of that, I'm wasting what little time I have. And the littleness of my time, we've already talked about how important that is. I think that's why the quest stories have always captured our imagination. And the Arthurian Grail story just happened to emerge at a time in our civilization that was just on the verge. So it's set at a huge cultural transition, the transition from the high civilization of the empire into the Dark Ages. But it's also written at the next major cultural transition, from the transition from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance and the rebirth, and then you're going to have the scientific revolution and all these things, and people will argue about what is actually worth devoting your life to. But I think that's why these stories of heroic quests have always captured our imaginations. How about, so we zoomed in on the Holy Grail. Let's zoom back out on the Arthur story as a whole. Because you can find, I wish I'd have thought to put it on the screen, but I'll share a picture with you. There's a, I forget the name of the church, but it'll take me 10 minutes to find it. There's a church in Italy that has scenes from the life of Arthur carved over its door. It has, it's got Arthur, I believe it's got Gawain, and it's got Mordred trying to kidnap Guinevere or something. And the carvings are from the 1100s, within just a few decades of Geoffrey of Monmouth giving us the first narrative version of Arthur's life. And the church is in Italy, not Britain. right? And in the 1100s, to get from Britain to Italy, now that's a big deal. And yet somehow the story had already captured the hearts of heroes so much that they're celebrating it in other cultures. And we haven't stopped. There are 2 Arthur television shows in production right now. One's The Winter King, which has already had 1 season. I think it was The Winter King. I've seen the first season. It was pretty good. And the other hasn't come out yet, but it's going to be called The Pendragon Cycle, based on a series of novels. And we're still cranking out Arthurian stuff to this day. Why? Why has this story captured the world's imagination? What do you think?
I think probably because mainly like the characters in the actual story, like most of them, with the exception of Galahad, he was just boring. Most of them kind of like feel more human to us. We kind of relate to them, and yet they do these extraordinary feats.
Okay.
What I was gonna say is exactly what Rhea said. I think it's the fact that the characters that are the most interesting, the characters that we spend the most time with, are the most flawed characters. Like, just look at Lancelot. Like, he's the greatest knight ever in the world, and he's banging the queen. And not just banging the queen, but also Arthur loves this knight. So it's like betraying your best friend. And what I was also gonna say about specifically Galahad is that I think that it's supposed to reflect how virtue isn't very, there's no movement in virtue. There's no discord in virtue. You know what I mean? Because Galahad was just like Ray said, he was just boring. He was like a concept of a character. Like if you really think about it, Lancelot is the greatest knight, and this guy has like a magical grandfather. I was expecting him to pull out like a laser sword at the end of the book. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm being so serious. I was expecting him to like kill everybody.
But he
And then
pointed at
ascend.
his face first, the first time he looked at it.
No, I was expecting him to pull out like a fire sword. I was expecting him to go crazy, right? Because there's this setup that not only does he have a magical heritage or magical like lineage, but on top of that, he's the son of the greatest knight in the world, who's also prophesied to surpass his father as a knight. But then he gets the grail and dies. You see what I mean?
Oh, sure. No, I do see. So for them, the Grail is the highest. Good.
Yeah, I know that's the highest good.
But you do wonder, like, okay, what did it mean to attain it? So he he saw it, but they all saw it, and now he's dead, and it went away. So I get the anticlimax of that.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you expect there to be some kind of order back in Earth, back on Earth. Mm-hmm. You don't expect there to be because he's this Messiah figure.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A Messiah moves people. He doesn't move himself. He doesn't just move himself. You know what I mean? But then this guy gets the Grail and then goes up, and then Arthur and Mordred, and Arthur is just left to have to fight to the death with his inbred son. Yeah.
So fair. So like with the end of the Grail, like, okay, so what hope is there left? Well, there's the hope that, like Galahad, we might someday live forever and ever in heaven. And not that that's not a firm hope, but it's like they already believed that before they already heard of the Grail. So I get that. I'll come back to that maybe in a minute. Let's hear other thoughts on the story as a whole. Arthurian legend. Why does it capture us?
I think the phrase, it's kind of cringy, but the phrase that legends never die has a lot to do with the fact that Arthur's story and everything that has to do with his time being king and his time even before as a kid. A lot of people see Arthur and his story as fascinating, and he's like a legend basically. And the fact that all of their stories have so much to tell makes it easy for it to just be retold in many different versions, and a lot of people are still very interested in it. So obviously, why not keep the story going for like ages and ages to come?
Coming from that, I think it has like everything that people love. It has magic, romance, it has fate, it has like
Baby killing.
yeah, it has everything that people love, and it's been going on from like years and years and years. So it's like kind of tradition, just maintaining what people love, and like it's never gonna change. Those like stories even though we don't see them as much anymore, that story will never like change completely because it was like such an impact from like our ancestors that it's gonna keep like going through the years.
I think also since like people believe that Arthur was real, and like there are like a lot of places that you can look at the story and be like that could have happened, or like with like the Holy Grail and everything, like quests like that did happen. And so I think that like it's one of those stories where people just there's enough of a mix between like history and magic and like and fantasy that people just kind of sank into it because they were like, this is awesome. And the fact that like they could look at it and be like, oh, this like Arthur could very well be a real person, makes them be like kind of, because everyone wants to believe that magic and like fantasy is real. So I think that little part that's like, hey, he very well could be real is kind of what grabs us and be like, this could all be real, even though realistically we know it's not likely. But I think like that's kind of what draws us into it.
Yeah, and I think that it has so many stories and like different like adventures to tell that it will never like end completely because there's something different to tell every time, you know.
It'll never be boring.
Yeah. Or like the same because the story has changed. Like this what's the name of the Disney movie?
Sword in the Stone?
Yeah, that one is different from the book, and the book is different from the series that I saw, and like all the stories are different but based on like the same story, you know.
And Blanco? Anything?
Why? I mean, I don't know. I think it's without even noticing. I think everybody has grown up with Arthur in different aspects because of how many recreations of it there's been. Like again, there's been TV shows, movies, books. That even like looking back, you can find yourself reading about Arthur, even if it was a kid's book or a kid's movie. And I just think that people being connected since years ago to now is because I guess they find the comfort in like having these stories in the sense that there could be someone out there saving people. And I think a lot of people find comfort in that because it's nice knowing that there's someone doing good for you.
So my mind goes back to 10 years ago, or a little more than 10 years ago, when the first trailers for the Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens, came out, right? So I'm a big Star Wars fan and already a grown man. I mean, 10 years ago I was 35 years old. And so really looking forward to them bringing finally a new Star Wars movie, because we had resigned ourselves, us old men, to the fact that you know there wouldn't be any new Star Wars on the screen. And so it's this, they show it in the trailer where Han Solo, who had been the cynical, skeptical character, now you're seeing him for the first time as an old man, and he says something along the lines of Chewie, we're home got me, but it was it's true, the Force, the Jedi, it's true, all of it. The old stories still capture our minds because the old stories are true. It doesn't mean that the old stories report to us the same thing that a video camera would have captured if a video camera were there. There are far deeper levels of truth than just what a video camera would capture. Life is not data driven. There's a philosophical rule called Chesterton's fence. It says it says a man buys a property and there's a fence built on the property and he has no idea why the fence is there, so he tears it down. Like, I don't need this, I don't need this freaking fence. And then I'm gonna butcher the details, but then the seasons change and a bunch of bears come into his property and eat his pigs or something. And he's like, oh, that's why the fence was there. And the lesson from the story that I've butchered is that we should be very careful tearing down and disposing the things that our ancestors have built, the stories they've told, the values they've celebrated. Doesn't mean we accept everything uncritically, and there would be no progress. But to be very cautious about disposing of the things that have enlivened our civilization for centuries or even millennia, just because right now, this minute, I don't really get what they're there for, right? There's a good chance that the things that have given meaning to the lives of our ancestors for generations were put there for a reason, right? They gave meaning to their lives for a reason. With this specific story, we know that just as the Iliad and Odyssey are thoroughly Greek pagan stories, that Arthurian literature is thoroughly a Christian story. And in the Christian storytelling tradition, there's always been an emphasis on the flawed hero, on the imperfect person, with the exceptions of Christ and the Virgin Mary. Every figure in the Bible who does something extraordinary is also somebody who screws up royally. We saw that with King David. You might think of St. Paul the Apostle, who wrote half the New Testament, who spent years killing Christians before he decided to become one. The redemption arc, that for whatever reason, in Christian storytelling, God always chooses the people who are really crappy, so that everybody who reads the story knows it's not about the people, but about the God that chose them. What Arthur does, what the Arthurian lit does brilliantly with this, is it blends that faith notion with a very real dynamic in life. All right, and that is that real life is not just I've done something crappy and I fail and now I do better. It's I do something crappy and I fail and I do better for a while, but when I failed, that closed down opportunities to me. All right, so there are certain goods I will never have access to because of that failure. But when those opportunities close to me, a new opportunity arises, and then I fail there, and that door is shut. But then a new door opens, and so what it combines is it combines this rich notion of grace and mercy and forgiveness and second and 10th and 10,000 and second chances with the realism about the fact that choices still have consequences. You know, if a lot of things had gone differently, then, you know, if Arthur himself had lived in a way where he was worthy to achieve the Grail, he might still be sitting on the throne of England today. 1,600 years later, England may have been a paradise. That door was shut. Helplessness. There was always more mercy around the corner. It just looked different. It just meant something different. And I think that's one of the things that's really powerful about this story. And I'm grateful that you've joined me in exploring the story together for the last few months. That's all I need from you for today. I'd say the rest of the time is yours, but there ain't none. That's it. Thanks to our discussion leaders.
Walk around the light a bit, trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million missing pieces. When I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So sit back in your hole, or get back in your cave. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with